I welcome you to this panel discussion this evening. And let me very quickly introduce you to the panel, the distinguished panel that we have over here. We have Dr. Narain Sinha, who is professor at the University of Botswana. He's a renowned economist and very well known in Asian and African regions particularly. He's also my teacher. He taught me at the university. Dr. Narain Sinha, I welcome you to this webinar, to this panel discussion. We have Mr. Ujwal Thakar. I'm sorry, there's some technical glitch that we are not able to see him, but we'll get over it very quickly. He has been instrumental in establishing 3 large retail banks in the country. So he's a veteran banker. He is ex-CEO for Pratham India. He's board member to several NGOs, including Educate India. And he's a thinker and a mentor. We read his Facebook posts every day with a lot of interest. And he's very popular with the young people. I welcome you to this panel discussion, Mr. Thakur.
Thank you.
We have Dr. David Bishai. Dr. David Bishai is a health economist of international repute. He was the president of International Health Economics Association. He is a professor in the Department of Population, Family and Reproductive Health at Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins University. And he is not only a friend of IIHMR, he is also a friend of India. I welcome you, Dr. David Bishai, to this panel discussion. He's joining us from Baltimore. Then we have Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay. We know him better through his columns. He's a senior journalist. He's an author and consulting editor for Business Standard. I welcome you, Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay, to this panel discussion. We have Madam Hema Krishnamurthy, who is a practicing chartered accountant. She has been consultant to MSMEs for many years, and she's also a visiting faculty at IIM Bangalore. Madam Hema Krishnamurthy, I welcome you to this panel discussion. May I now invite Dr. P.R. Sodani to tell us something about, the panel and the other people who are attending this webinar about IIHMR University, what we do. Dr. Sodani.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and I am Dr. P.R. Sodani, the Pro-President of IIHMR University. I of health systems policy and health economics and financing. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome the panelists here on behalf of IIHMR University. Today we have renowned panelists with us. They come from varied background that will help us to understand the effect of COVID on the economy. They are the renowned in their own area of field. They comes from the economics, chartered accountant, and many more areas are there. And they are the good thinkers, they are the mentors, and they are the leaders in the. So IIHMR welcomes you all on behalf of IIHMR faculty, and we are really very glad that this webinar, that is one of the important in our webinar series, which we have started in the response of COVID-19. At IIHMR University, it's a postgraduate research university, and we have 35 years of experience and we do a lot of research in the health sector. And when I say research in the health sector, our focus is mainly on the management research, means that the health economics and financing, strategic management, program management, policy research, and like that. We produce the student in the area of hospital management, pharmaceutical management, as well as the public health. We run a course, MPH, in cooperation with Johns Hopkins University, which is a globally renowned university, and we are very thankful to the Johns Hopkins for this collaboration and cooperation. Projects in the area of research and health sector, many of the projects are working together with the Johns Hopkins and other leading institutions and universities. Just coming to the point that since COVID-19, it has disrupted the economy, as we all know. The role of IIHMR University in the public health environment, we have started discussion every day on the COVID-19, as well as also thinking ahead that what would be the way forward for the country as well as the nations affected by this pandemic. At IIHMR, we are also happy to share with you that we are just coming a general health management special issue on the COVID-19, and many of the faculty members of IIHMR University, they have contributed tremendous special issue, and the special issue will be especially on the COVID-19, keeping the mind that COVID-19 is influencing the economy in a varied way. So the papers are on the epidemiology, public health, hospital preparedness, economy, mental health, and like that. So there are many issues we will cover in the special issue. I request all the attendees, please go through the special issue of Journal of Health Management that will be released in the next month. I welcome you all, and again I welcome the panelists very well from IIHMR University. Now the space is open for the panelists. I will not take much time from them, and then listen them carefully and then discuss the COVID-19 environment. Thank you so much. Monica, please. Hello.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sodani. Now I would like to invite Professor Narain Sinha for his talk. He will be talking about the effect of COVID-19 on the Indian economy. So over to you, Dr. Sinha.
Okay, shall I switch off my video then?
Right, sir. I think then your voice would be a little better for us to hear.
वीडियो मैंने बंद कर दिया, मैंने बोल दिया नहीं.
Hello.
Yeah, Hiten, can you run through his slides?
Hi, Tindra.
Shall I open my slides or you are transferring me?
Hitendra, can you open his presentation or should I do it from here?
It's visible now.
I'm sharing the presentation.
Yeah.
Are you able to see?
Yes, we are able to see. Go ahead.
I'm not able to see.
You are able to see.
Yeah, we can see it.
Sir, please switch off your web.
Oh. Yes. I'm not able to see the slides, or shall I open my file?
Yes, you can open parallelly.
Yeah, you can open and start.
Let me first. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening and good morning for David. I am thankful to IIHMR University for giving me this opportunity. It will be a pleasure for me to be associated with this panel discussion. Now, purpose here is I shall discuss the fundamentals of an economy. Then I shall discuss Indian economy before COVID-19. Then we shall discuss the economy during COVID-19 and then economy after COVID-19. This is my outline. Is it fine?
Absolutely.
I'm audible?
Yes, sir.
It's not is it your present here? Now, Indian economy before COVID-19, I'm dividing between 3 periods: economy before 1991, economy during 91, 2011, and during economy after 2011. And then health of the economy is generally discussed. Will you change it? In terms of economic growth, inflation, and unemployment, economy is the human body. If some organ malfunction, the whole body is affected. Economy also the same thing happens. If sector is in disequilibrium, it will affect all other sectors of the economy. Normally, the size of the economy is measured in terms of the gross domestic product, and economic growth is the increase in gross domestic product. Rate at which the size of the economy increases over the period is known as economic growth. Inflation in economics, we can consider it in terms of the increase in price. Normally, people are confused with inflation with that price. Inflation is a change in price. So inflation should never be zero. Unemployment is measured in terms of the total number of employed and the difference of total labor force and employed. And fiscal deficit and balance of payment deficit are other parameters which are very crucial for the purpose of the analysis of economic growth. Now, coming to the next slide, I shall explain different components of the gross domestic product. Now, what happens? It is like Indian Trinity. We have Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. In this system, what happens? Production activity is the creation of Brahma. Whatever is created out of the resources, it is the production activity. And generally, we divide the production activity keep it there. In 4 major sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, construction, real estate, and service sector. The contribution of agriculture is at present is 15%, and then contribution of service is 40%. Remaining is manufacturing and construction. Now, the income is the role of the Vishnu. Whatever is created, income is generated. And then what happens if we divide the income of the economy in terms of 5 different broad categories: income from wages, income in the form of rent, income in the form of interest payment, income in the form of profit, income in the form of proprietor's income. Why I am discussing this? Because the COVID will affect some sector of this whole format. Now, on the expenditure side, this is the creation of Shiva. Whatever is produced and then it is consumed. And it is consumed by the 5 major categories. First is household consumption, which is a major component of expenditure, followed by gross investment, and then it comes government expenditure, and then we come external sector. Now, later on we shall discuss it, that COVID will affect agriculture. As a result, GDP will decline. COVID will affect manufacturing sector. As a result, GDP will decline. COVID will affect construction activity, service sector will decline. Now wages are reduced. There are no wages for the migrant labor, so wages will be reduced. Rent, government is saying don't charge any rent, so that will be reduced. Interest payment will be reduced, profit of the reduced. So all the segment of this layout will be disturbed, will be reduced by the COVID-19. Consumption will be declined. Gross investment will be deferred. Government expenditure will but increase, and export will decline because there is no demand global because of the global recession. Export demand will also decline. Imports will increase. So that is how the effect of COVID will work towards the economic activity. Now come to the next slide. Yes, not like there are certain laws which are there, but the economic laws should be interpreted with care. It changes with location, it changes with time. Economic growth has a negative relationship with unemployment. If unemployment increases, economic growth will decline. Inflation increases, economic growth will decline. Fiscal deficit increases, economic growth will decline. But income and consumption are positively related. If income increases, consumption also increases. If income increases, investment also increases. So this is a broad relationship among the economic parameters and economic variables which are in economics. And if any relationship is disturbed, it will affect the whole setup. Now coming to the next slide, then we come to Indian economy before 1991. The period before 1991 for the young generation was characterized by stagnating growth rate. Inspector Raj, there are a lot of controls in the economy, such as FARA, MRTP, etc. The growth rate was around 3.5%, and it was labeled by a renowned economist and my supervisor, Professor Raj Krishna, as Hindu rate of growth. It is internationally known as Hindu rate of growth. So what did he mean by calling it Hindu rate of growth? That the growth rate is as stagnant or as universal as our Hinduism. Then during this period, however, strong data was created on national income, employment, and labor, health, etc. Then what happened that in economic reforms in 1991 emerged from the support and supported by extensive research led by various committees, and it led to the increase in growth rate. The current account deficit, that is the export minus import, was favorable. There was however higher foreign direct investment. Foreign exchange reserves also improved. Here I would like to mention that before the economic reforms in 1991 were launched, India government had, Reserve Bank of India had the foreign exchange reserves worth 15 days of imports. Later on, it increased to 1 year because of the economic reforms. So economic reform brought a lot of changes in the economy. 20 years of economic reform converted elephant economy into a tiger economy. Economy grew at the rate of 9% during 2003, 2004 to 2007, 2008. Later, it started plummeting, declining at the rate of 7.7%. It was because of the financial global crisis of 2008, when the petrol price was shooting at $130 per barrel, and our economy and most of the economy suffered. But fortunately, Indian economy did not suffer much because of that. After 2011-2012, the economic growth started slowing down, and subsequently it went on sliding. The twin deficit, fiscal deficit and balance of payment also fueled the economic, slowed down the economy. In the next slide, I am presenting. Yes. Next slide. Unemployment started increasing. Of late, over past few quarters, the economy has been experiencing a significant slowdown. In the third quarter, ending December 29, economy grew at a 6-year low of 4.7%. Investment and consumption, two biggest component of aggregate demand, also suffered. Manufacturing sector also started declining, basically because of the liquidity crunch. Then in the next slide, I'm presenting a graph to tell you the trend in the economic growth. Initially, you can see that the growth rate is increasing, and then after 2014-16, it started declining, and the trend is also declining. Now, what was the main reason for this change in the economic growth? In the next slide, we can observe that the economy growth suffered. First shock we got in terms of the demonetization, where the economic growth declined. Second shock was GST. But after that, the economic growth slightly increased, but not at that level of 3.2, and later on it went on declining, and then it came the COVID-19. In the next slide, I'm presenting the trends which we can in the current account balance, current account deficit. Here we can see that in the beginning, in the initial years, it was positive. You can see it was positive. Later on, it went down, bottom at 2013, and then it never went up to positive or surplus exports. Next slide, we have the fiscal deficit, which we can see that fiscal deficit was very low in 2011-12, but it increased by 2016 to more than 3.5%. Next slide. Yeah, so the fiscal deficit, there are 4 measures of fiscal deficit. I'm considering all measures increased from 2011 to 2016, and then later on it went on decreasing, and then it started increasing. Now, next we come to next slide. Yeah. So now various international agencies have estimated have given different estimates of economic growth. World Bank has put the growth rate of Indian economy during 2021 between 1.5 to 2.8%, and it is the lowest since 1991. Asian Development Bank estimates 4% in the fiscal 2021. S&P Global Rating slashed 3.5% from 5.2%. Fitch Rating puts it estimate 2%. India Rating and Research is putting it lower from 5% to 3%. The different international agencies have slashed down the economic growth of Indian economy during the fiscal 2021. NSSO, Government of India, revised estimates of growth. In first quarter, they have lowered from 8% to 7.5%. In the second quarter, they have lowered from 7% to 6.2%, and for the third quarter in fiscal 2021, they have lowered 6.6% to 5.6%. And this estimate was released in February 2020, just before COVID. Now, next part. So these are the major thing is in the migrant labor of in India. The seasonal labor migration flows from rural to industries, urban market, and farms. Major migration corridors are also identified. That from UP, Bihar to Punjab, Haryana, Maharashtra, and Gujarat, and then Odisha, West Bengal, northeast to Karnataka. Why I'm saying this? Because we had this information before the lockdown was imposed. So if the government should have used this information and tried to arrange the movement of migration according to these corridors. Migrant workers are very important for Indian economy. They are employed in the construction sector, domestic work, big clean and transport, mining, and MSME. During the lockdown period, 92.5% of the labor have lost 1 to 4 weeks of job. In the next slide, we are explaining what are the information available to the government. A survey of 3,196 migrant workers across northern and central India was conducted by Jan Sahas during March 27, 29 to 2020. Just see the date. About 49.2% workers have no ration card, have no ration. 39.4% had ration for 2 weeks. About 99.2% workers have Aadhaar card. 86.7% workers have bank account or Jan Dhan account document. 61.7% have ration card. 23.7% have BPL cards. This information was available at the end of March. Then about 95% workers get wages below minimum wage rate. And if the evidence about this migration was used, then horrifying crisis witnessed by the migrant labor could have been averted to some extent. Next, coming to migrant labor, the relief package of 1.7 lakh crore announced by the government might not benefit the government, the migrant labor, because the government does not have the information, adequate information about the migrant labor. Providing robust safety nets of the nets for vulnerable and focus on an ensuring job continuity, of non-agricultural sector will be difficult. Now, rehabilitation of migrant labor is going to be an important, urgent need to mobilize resources to stimulate economy for increased employment, which in turn will stimulate the demand. After the lockdown, it should be ensured that the migrant labor is available for the revival of MSME and construction sector. I have observed recently that people are able, after the lockdown was opened recently, workers were there in the labor market, but there was no job for them. In the demand for labor was there, but there are no labors for them. So the market demand for labor and supply of there, they are not interacting. This is what we believe. There is no interaction of demand for labor. People demand job, and there is demand for labor, there is supply of labor, but there is no connection between the two. Unemployment data are collected by NSSO and Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, a Mumbai-based think tank. In December 2019, it was 40 per years high. Rate of unemployment is higher in urban areas. Before the start of pandemic in mid-March, it was about 20%. And but for the week ended May 3, it increased by 7%. 27%.
If I may,
Pardon?
If I may just interrupt you for a minute, because probably you have another 5-7 minutes for this.
Okay. So please change the slide. Now, I'll come to micro MSME. Now, for MSME, Hema will better know it, but I shall just inform the audience that MSME Development Act 2006 divides the sector two main: manufacturing sector and service sector. Presently, there are over 63 million MSMEs in India. Employment in MSME is about 90%. Contribution of MSMEs in GDP is about 30%. MSMEs output in manufacturing sector is about 33%. Contribution of MSME in the total exports 45%. And after the agriculture, MSME is the second biggest source of employment. Now, what has happened to MSME? I think Hema will take, so I can skip next slide. Then we come to agriculture sector. Now, agriculture sector, as we shall see the later slide, that agriculture sector has suffered so far. The suffering of agriculture sector is very minimum. But now, When the rabi crops started arriving in market from second week of October, then it will be difficult if there is no procurement of the crop. If there is no warehouse storage of the crop, the farmers will suffer. There are no takers of the crop. The government should make appropriate arrangement for the procurement of the crop. Now, the lack of labor and shortage of liquidity in rural areas is going to affect agriculture sector adversely. So far, the loss of agriculture sector is below 2%. Now, the payment due various agencies dealing with central and state government should be released on priority basis to ensure liquidity in the trading system in rural areas. Then we come to the next service sector. Please come. Yeah. Now, in service sector also we see the service sector is suffering a lot. Service sector is compared to hospitality will suffer a lot. Financial aid in terms of reduction in airport charges, overflight fees, tax prices on sector should be reduced to financial aid to deal with higher expenses incurred to prevent and spread of disease such as screening of passenger disinfection should be arranged by the government. Rationalization of VAT charges on ATF can grant temporary relief to the airlines. This is very important sector and is going to suffer in the now, next slide. We are coming to the impact. Yeah, you can skip it. Skip it. Yeah, there are three major channels of which will affect economy of Indian economy. First is linkages, second one is supply chain, and third one is macroeconomic factors. Linkages, when you come to the linkages, what happens, and there are various MSMEs and various manufacturing firms in India who have strong linkages in Europe and China. And because of those strong linkages in Europe and China, the performance of the manufacturing is a lot because of the COVID. I have read somewhere that there are many manufacturing firms who have exported to European countries. The export merchandise has been delivered, but there is the problem of the payment. Because the firms in the exporters in the European economies are not able to pay the whole amount back to the firm, to the first Indian firms. So that will be a problem. Major contributors. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, please. The major contributors to GDP from the supply side are agriculture, manufacturing, construction, hospitality, etc. Number of Indian firms, as I already discussed, you can skip it. Number of Indian firms have linkages. We have discussed already this slide. Please come to the second slide quickly. The dependence of India on China is huge. Of the top 20 products of two-digit ethnic classification are imported from China on account of, and China's share is very high. Oh, I'm not able to see it. India's imports are now India's total electronic imports accounts for 45.5% of China. Around 1/3 of machinery and almost 2/5 of organic chemicals that India purchases from world come from China. For automotive parts and fertilizer, China's share in India imports is more than 25%. Around 65 to 70% of pharmaceutical ingredients are coming from China. 90% of mobiles are coming from China. So a supply chain may affect sizable disruption with industries and markets in India. Now, China's share is very high in organic chemicals, inorganic chemicals, medicines and pharmaceutical products, dyes, consumer durables, for automatic parts, mobile phones, etc. Now, this is very important to note that because we believe that after the COVID, the health sector in Indian economy may boom because of the demand for health products and medicines. But unfortunately, what is happening that most of the ingredients are coming from China. So we shall have to look for some alternative to this, so that our health sector start rebounding after the COVID. Next comes the demand side. Now, because of the skip it, please. Skip it. Skip this. Now, on the demand side, because there are wage income is reduced, because of the wage income, consumption will be reduced, investment demand will be reduced, government will expenditure will increase, and external debt will reduce. So it will, all these factors will reduce demand side of the gross domestic product. Because consumption is the biggest 7% component, followed by 30% investment, 12%, and government's expenditure is met from the tax revenue, which will be drastically reduced due to the lockdown, and it will increase the fiscal deficit. Maybe it is expected that fiscal deficit may go to the double digit. The external sector, fortunately, external sector, our dependence on the external sector is not much, as we shall see later in the next slide. The share of our exports in the world is small. It's very small. Our imports are high. Crude oil price is very low. Share of tourism in India is not very high as compared to the share in China, Thailand, and other countries. So this external sector is expected to be will be affected moderately by the COVID. Now, coming to the next, or better, we can go to the slide. Next slide. Now, after the lockdown, as we can see, consumer behavior changes forceful. Labor will not be available soon after the lockdown. Rehabilitation migrant labor is going to be an urgent necessity to mobilize resources to stimulate economy for increasing employment, which in turn stimulate demand. After the lockdown, it should be ensured that migrant labor is available for the revival of MSME and construction sector. Lockdown will put pressure on MSME and farm sector also. Social crisis created by COVID pandemic, it will increase the inequality, exclusion, discrimination, unemployment in the medium and long term. Apart from providing robust safety nets for the vulnerable, a focus on ensuring job continuity and job creation in non-agricultural sector will be imperative for the government of India. Coming to the next, in India, the World Economic Report has indicated that top 10% of Indian population get 54% of all income, while bottom 50% 15% of income. Now, in 2017-18, the richest 1% of population owed 73% of wealth, which increased by rupees 20,913 billion, equivalent to the whole total budget of the central government in the same year. The poorer half of the population, 1%, increased their wealth. Now, richest 1% in the country hold more than 4 times of wealth held by bottom 70%. This skewed distribution will impact the demand for sectors like automobile, consumer goods, particularly FMCGs. So we cannot expect, in the light of the high inequality, we cannot expect that demand will increase in the post-COVID period. Coming to next. Now, we can skip it. Here I have discussed the sector for the audience later. Chemical industry, shipping industry, pharmaceutical industry, textile industry, solar power sector. But I want to go to the slide which gives electronics industry, IT industry, tourism and aviation. Now here we can see that exposure to for the category this David will take care of it later. The population share is 65%, and here our position is slightly better because the dependence ratio in India is very small. Hospital beds and per thousand is 0.7, which is very poor. Health spending share in GDP is just 3.5% before COVID, so it will increase later. So we have very poor infrastructure for this. In macroeconomic health, fiscal deficit, in terms of fiscal deficit, we are very poor, so 7.4%. Foreign exchange reserves are reasonably good. Commodity exports as a percentage of total merchandise exports, 18% is moderate. Tourism sector 5.4% is okay. Informal employment, adequacy of social security coverage, we have a very poor situation. So this is a status of various macro economic factors in the system.
So you have just 1 minute to summarize it.
Yeah, you can come last but one slide, or before last 2 slides. In one slide, I have discussed the sector-wise impact of COVID on Indian economy. Yeah, please. Yeah.
So I think we'll get back to you.
Yeah, change it. Yeah, this one. Here we can see that the financial sector will be, the loss of financial sector will be minus 17%, mining sector minus 50%. So here we can see the agriculture sector so far and public administration, they will be least affected by the COVID. But if the proper infrastructure does not exist for agriculture sector, then it will increase. Next, you can come to the last but one slide. And I shall share a story. Let me share a story about John Maynard Keynes, father of modern economics, at the time of the Great Recession of 1930s. He was once asked, "How is your wife?" He responded, "Compared to whose wife?" Now, the point being made here is that many things in life are relative. When all countries are suffering from pandemic, any policy which comes immediately for India, demographic, social, economic, would be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha, for this comprehensive presentation. And without wasting time, I would like to invite Mr. Thakar. Mr. Thakar, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can very well hear you.
Okay.
So I would like to invite you to talk about the problem of the migrant laborers. So we understand that migrant laborers are a very important part of Indian economy. In fact, they drive the economy. But this particular crisis has made us understand that the amount of migration that happens in the country and the kind of vulnerability that these laborers have, we have not been able to acknowledge that so far. So over to you, Mr. Thakar.
Thanks, Monika, and good evening, everybody. Today, I'm representing the NGO sector, although I've been a banker for a larger part of my life but the last 18 years I've focused on the NGO sector and the social sector. So that's the perspective that I'm going to bring to the table today. So the biggest positive, and I like to remain positive, being in this sector, you have to live on positivity. So to me, the biggest positive of the COVID saga is that it has highlighted India's biggest invisible disaster. You might want to know what that is and how could COVID have highlighted it. So, I mean, to increase the suspense a little bit more, the biggest disaster is neither floods, nor famines, nor landslides, nor tsunami. They happen once in a while. But an everyday disaster which we, the middle class and upper class, don't acknowledge is poverty. And what COVID has done is to bring poverty to the fore. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because COVID today has actually brought the fear of God in all segments of the society, be it the rich, the middle class, the poor. Everyone is wondering what is going to happen to them. Everyone is wondering where my next income is going to come from, How is my business going to be impacted? Will I have a job? So this whole fear is leading to some realization of how the poor live. And I'm hoping that that would be the biggest positive of the COVID thing in India, because it will bring empathy towards the poor. Empathy which we have lacked. We've lacked it in policy, we've lacked it in our behavior to the poor, and which is the result, as a result, we still have between 200 and 700 million poor in this country. So, by way of opening remarks, that's what I wanted to say, that COVID is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a terrible thing, actually. Everyone is scared, everyone is very afraid, but in the long run, it has the potential for the politicians and the economists in this country to focus on the problem of poverty, which is what will bring us out of this and which will improve the life of the citizens in this country. So what is the impact? I mean, Professor Sinha has talked a lot about the economic impact of COVID, but in my layman's term, the cost of lockdown, I mean, if you're a $2.8 trillion economy, the everyday cost of lockdown is 32,000 crores, which is a lot of money. And the impact of 32,000 crores of loss of GDP, and if you take a 15% average GST plus income tax, is 5,000 crore rupees a day. And if you expect the lockdown in its average terms to go on for 100 days, it's revenue loss of 5 lakh crores. And I'm highlighting these numbers. It may not be 5 lakh crores, it may be 3 lakh crores, but the number is going to be exceedingly high. And it has implications for what the government can do in the future in terms of policy. In addition, you have the cost of COVID itself. I mean, if 5 million people are going to be attacked by COVID, and that is not an unrealistic number, 5 million is not even 2% of India's population. So 5 million is a number I expect COVID will attack India on. And if they're to be treated at even 2 lakh rupees per citizen, or 2 lakh rupees per patient, the cost of COVID itself is going to be 1 lakh crores. So all said and done, the overall cost of COVID will be loss of revenue 5 lakh crores, 1 lakh crores of extra costs. As Tamal will tell you later, banking losses will be in the region of 2 to 4 lakh crores. So you're talking about government's inability to spend, or ability to spend, being reduced dramatically by between 7 lakhs and 10 lakh crores. Now, these are very important numbers to understand for the future. So, what are the lessons from COVID? I mean, the lessons from COVID, the first and foremost, which everyone is talking about, which is why I'm here to talk to you, is the focus it has brought on migrant labor. I mean, the scenes that you've seen of thousands and thousands of people walking hundreds of miles, they're horrid stories. I mean, for those of us in my age group, we've seen the old TV serials like Bunyad, where you saw thousands of migrants from Pakistan coming to India in 1947. But otherwise, we've not seen scenes like this at all. I mean, it's beyond imagination to think that a man will carry his wife and children and walk 400 miles with no transportation. So clearly the focus has come on why people are migrating, why is there migrant labor. But the lesson also learned is that the migrant worker has zero trust. The fact that he could walk at the announcement by the Prime Minister at 9 in the night that there's going to be lockdown from tomorrow, what is the first reaction of the migrant labor? He begins to walk to his way 500 miles away to his hometown. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the poor migrant has no faith in society. He has no faith in government. He has no faith in his employer. And there's a complete trust deficit between the poor and the rest of society. So that is, to my mind, the biggest learning from COVID which anyone can get. So that should bring us our focus to why does migrant labor happen? why do people move from their cocoons of safety to come down to cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, etc.? What is it that really propels them to move? And some of the reasons for that are rainfall deficits of floods in areas where they live, uh, low land holdings, unviable land holdings. They can't make enough income there from their land holdings, so they would starve there. Uh, in many cases, it's social and political conflicts. For example, there's a lot of labor which comes from Bastar or the tribal regions of this country. All construction sites are full of that kind of labor. So these are the problems that bring migrant labor, and these are problems which need to be tackled in the future if you have to solve the problem of the migrant labor. Now, the estimate of the migrant labor, and migrant labor is directly correlated to poverty. The extent of migrant labor by various estimates ranges from 150 to 300 million. That's a lot of people traveling for livelihoods from across the country. And of this, almost 20% is interstate migration. So fair amount of complexity there, fair amount it takes to understand what the real solutions have to be in the post-COVID world. And obviously, migrant labor is badly exploited wherever they go because of asymmetries of information. The poor migrant labor does not know how to negotiate. He does not know what is an offer in cities, and so therefore he or she get exploited all the time. And that's not true only of the migrant labor, it's true for the entire poor in this country. Like I said to you before, that depending on how you define poverty, whether it's $1.25 a day, which Niti Aayog in India accepts, or $2 a day, which internationally is accepted, the range of poverty in this country would be anywhere between 300 and 800 million people. Out of 1.3 billion people, you have almost 800 million people who are poor. But why is there no focus on poor? Because the voice is with the remaining 500 million people. It's people like us who shape governmental policies, who shape influences, who are on TVs, who are everywhere, and the other side has no voice whatsoever. The only voice that it gets is from social activists or the NGO sector, which tries to do its bit. But there again, government pretty much tries to suppress those voices when they raise because it's inconvenient for the government. No government likes to hear inconvenient things, and this government lower than most other governments that have ruled the country so far. So, coming to what are the solutions? I mean, I'm going to keep this short because much of the analysis of the problem has already been done. So let's quickly move to solutions. What can happen in the post-COVID world? What should happen? First of all, the obvious one is increase the spend on healthcare. I mean, today you're spending between 2 and 3% of GDP on healthcare. If you really want to build the healthcare system, which will be very necessary with the kind of illnesses that you've got and the kind of illnesses that have been ignored. One of the side effects of COVID is that all the other comorbidities have been completely ignored for the last month and a half and will continue to be ignored for the next 3 months. Now, the potential implication of that you're going to have a health crisis, which is bigger than the COVID crisis, because all the pent-up illnesses are going to come up, plus the weakness that COVID is going to cause is also going to create problems for you. So obviously, building the health infrastructure is the first problem. And you might have to dramatically reallocate money into the sector, take it away from other sectors because there's a limited pie there. Now, where the government takes it away from is its problem. It's a problem that they'll have to solve. The second part of the solution, to my mind, is strengthening the village economy. Now, you have to stop migration at its source. How can that be done? I mean, people, why do they migrate? Because they're starving wherever they are. Now, can we strengthen the village economies? And I know it's not a short-term solution. It will take anywhere between 5 and 15 years to strengthen village economies. But we are talking about it from Gandhiji's time. And yet, over the last 70 years, we've done nothing about it, or we've done very little about it. So there is a dramatic need to focus on rural livelihoods, on the village economy, to ensure that migration is checked at its source point. And that you'll have to do through multiple things, interventions in education, in health, in livelihoods, creating the jobs in the village economy. Not easy solutions, but demonstrated at scale by multiple NGOs. And so government just needs to talk to the third sector, pick up ideas and build on them and take them across the country. Now, if suddenly migrant labor dries, what is the solution in the metros? And obviously the solution in the metros is to build capacities locally. Why is it, for example, a state like Maharashtra has very little Maharashtrian labor? Is it that people have become lazy? Is it that they've got too educated and think of labor activities as non-productive? Now, these attitudes will have to change. There's a lot of unemployment in states like Maharashtra and the city of Mumbai itself, which can be tackled by local capacity building. So these are some of the solutions that one can think of. But COVID, I mean, my final remarks are that COVID is a reminder that things are not well, that things need to happen. The focus has to be on poverty. And my last parting shot is that strengthening of democracy is your biggest solution, which has been ignored for a long, long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thakur. And I mean, it was like a very lucid talk, bang on. So thank you so much for this talk. Now, without wasting time, I want to go to Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay. Whether the relief measures have been adequate or not, monetary and fiscal measures have been adequate or not, what needs to be done. Over to you, Mr. Tamal Bandyopadhyay.
Tamal, you're on mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good evening, and
we can hear you now.
I think both of them, Professor and the other person, have explained lots. So I would keep it very short, not too much. So you see, there are three constituencies in this particular area which you are asking me to talk on. Reserve Bank of India, that's country's central bank, the banking system, which gives the credit for economic purpose, and the government of India. And let's see one by one what all they have done. And of course, the beneficiaries are the Indian citizens, the people who need the money, the migrant laborers, the lower middle class, everybody else. Now, as far as government is concerned, it's announced 1.7 trillion package. That's what the government says. But if you dissect it, the size is exactly not that much. It's far lower. It's about 70,000 odd. Why I am saying this? Because it has different components. Some of them are already there. It's been front loaded. They are expected to spend later. It has been pushed forward, and a part of it also will be going through, or is going through the in terms of food grains and others from FCI go downs, etc. So if you add to the cost, etc., then you get into all this 1.7. But actual shorn of all kind of stuff, it's actually 70,000 odd crore. Globally, if you compare with developed markets, if you compare with other emerging markets, it's far less than what it should have been done. That's what people say. Now, I am not an economist. I am no judge whether this 70,000 is too high or too low. But as a percentage of GDP, I mean, it's less than 1%, far less than 1% compared to even double digits in some of the markets. Now, the question at this point of time, people are asking, economists across India and global are asking, why the government is so conservative. They want government to spend more, because why I'll come to that a little later. They think that government is pretty conservative. Now, there could be reason government is waiting and watching. It would come. For instance, there's an media has been talking about an MSME package. It's for the last 1 week we have been talking about that government is considering so on and so forth, but nothing has come. So probably the government is waiting and watching. It would come at the right time. It did not want to commit the kind of errors which we have done post Lehman crisis. Under 2008, we probably had an exaggerated sense of impact in India, and we brought in tons of money. We flooded the system with money. We brought down the interest rate to historic low, so on and so forth, and we had to pay the price for it. The banks were loaded with bad assets, and inflation shot up, so on and so forth. Probably the government does not want to commit that kind of exaggerated response. It wants to wait. But having said that, the COVID-19 is very different than 2008 financial crisis. Its impact is far, far, far higher. Other part could be the government is probably apprehensive that, look, if we do that, this kind of money, if we spend, our fiscal deficit will rise, and then the rating agencies will bring down our rates, sovereign rating. We are the lowest grade of investment banking, investment grade rating. Moody's Investor Service yesterday, they sort of warned India that it could come for a threat for a rating downgrade. Before that, Fitch had already said that. I'm not talking about the various growth numbers that people are saying. So why the government is little inhibited and conservative in its approach? There could be multiple reasons behind it. But as of now, as things stand, the Indian government is extremely conservative, probably the most conservative in spending compared to any other countries. Come to the Reserve Bank of India. What Reserve Bank of India has done? Reserve Bank of India has done cut the rates, not in a direct way, because you can't cut the rate unless you convene a meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee. But what Reserve Bank of India has done, it has cut the rate, not the policy rate, but the rate which is called reverse repo rate, the rate at which banks park their excess liquidity with the Reserve Bank of India. So technically, it is not a rate cut, but for all practical purpose, it is a rate cut, because it becomes a policy rate in a situation where there is too much of money is lost in the system. So that becomes a policy rate. When you are taking money from Reserve Bank of India, when you need money, that's the repo rate. That's the so-called policy rate. But right now in Indian context, reverse repo has become the policy rate. Banks are parking 8 trillion plus on any given day at the Reserve Bank of India reverse repo. So what Reserve Bank of India did, it did cut the policy. It did not cut directly, but it did cut the rate. That's point number one. Point number two, it announced a moratorium. It has told banks that don't take give the freedom to your borrowers not to pay the loans for the next 3 months, beginning for 31st March. So March, April, May, this quarter, the entities, the borrowers don't need to pay back. That's the second thing. Third thing they did, that they created a new window. It's called LTRO. I'm not getting into all the technicalities, but it's a money where the banks can borrow from Reserve Bank of India and give it to the entities. Now, Reserve Bank of India also is very different from other central banks. Like, for instance, if you see the US Federal Reserve, it's taking its own credit risk. It is giving money directly. It is buying even junk bond. What US has created an SPV, special purpose vehicle, where the government has 10% stake, and the rest is US Federal Reserve, and they are buying corporate bonds from the market. Now here we are not doing those kind of things. Forget that. RBI is does not believe in doing this thing directly to take credit exposure. But what RBI is doing is creating enabling situations where banks can borrow from Reserve Bank of India at a cheap rate and pass it on. Now, third part is what the banks are doing. Now, what banks are doing, banks are extremely conservative in giving loans. Banks are scared that, look, maybe there are people who are trying to use the opportunity. Maybe they don't need, everybody does not need the money. This is the kind of perception. particularly MSMEs and all. Anyway, our banks are not very good at appraisal the risk for the MSME segment. It's typically done by NBFCs in a large way. Banks are still yet to know the animal which is called MSME, where the financing is not balance sheet based but cash based. So they're pretty scared, and they're looking for various opportunities, various kind of excuses, if I may say so, why we should not give the loan. And there are a lot of confusion when Reserve Bank of India introduced the moratorium. So what happens is these banks give loan directly to certain segments, and to certain segments, banks do not give loan directly. They give loans through NBFCs and MFIs, because their exposure to NBFCs and MFIs is sort of considered as a priority sector lending. Now, do they offer the moratorium to the NBFCs and MFIs also? There's a confusion, and banks were initially very reluctant. They said, no, we are giving it to the economic purpose. We are giving it to the real borrowers who are taking money and putting it for business purposes. Why should we give it to MFIs and NBFCs? Because they are intermediaries. They are taking money from us and giving it to them. Now the MFI and NBFC saying, how can you do that?
Tamal, can you sum it up in another
minute?
or so?
Yes, I can. Yeah. They are saying, how can you do that? Because I am giving moratorium to my borrowers. Unless you give me my moratorium to us, we can't do this. But that has been now taken care of. Banks are forthcoming. So now, to cut a long story short, we have a long way to go. I don't want to get into all the details. Everybody needs money. The MFIs need money. The NBFCs need money. The end borrowers need money. MSMEs need money. Retailers need money. So on and so forth. Because what is happening, even if you give them money, probably many of them have eaten up their capital in the past 2 months under the lockdown. So debt only cannot serve the purpose. They also need support in other ways. Now, what the government has done till now, 500 rupees to the Jan Dhan account to individuals, nothing beyond that. So we need to do much more. And there is a possibility. This is the kind of time nobody bother much. I don't think any economist bothers much about what is your fiscal deficit. It can go up. It will go up. And if you allow that to happen, if you bring back growth impulse, then your apprehensions about being downgraded also probably can be taken care of. So it's a chicken and egg theory. What you do and what you don't do, what comes first. But under the laws, you are allowed, and Reserve Bank of India also allowed to print money. There are enough. In this kind of emergency, there are enough scope for both the government and the Reserve Bank of India to be less conservative and to come up with the solutions with money. The crisis is far higher than what we had seen in 2008. I think here we end. Here I am. Sorry. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Tamal. I would very quickly like to go to Dr. Bishai. Dr. Bishai, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, and yeah, we can also see you. Yeah. So over to you, Dr. Bishai, on health expenditures and how is it going to affect the health sector overall, this COVID crisis and the increased health expenditures. Over to you, Dr. Bishai.
Yes, thank you very much. And I appreciate the prior remarks because they highlight the disparities facing all of our countries dealing with the epidemic. I'd like to start out by reminding ourselves about the reason that we're all at home and in our rooms. All of the panelists, and I think most of you in the audience, have been on some kind of lockdown. If you think you're doing this to prevent yourself from getting coronavirus, you're only partially right. Epidemiologically, we can't get over this. We can only go through it. The only end to the pandemic is the achievement of herd immunity, which would require 60 to 70% of us to acquire immunity. There's no vaccine. If there is one, it will be in shortage next year. The only way to get to the end of this is to get the virus somehow. That's what's likely to happen. The reason we're at home is to slow down the epidemic in our own community. And why is that good? We're trying to save lives from preventing an overwhelming crisis in our health centers. This assumes that the health centers and the health facilities in our communities were really good and were saving us, and they needed to be unburdened from what would have happened, which would be a crisis of overcrowding. So we're at home simply to slow down the curve, but 60 to 70% of us are going to get coronavirus in the next 2 years unless a vaccine comes. Now, I'm saying that because in the West, with our excellent health services, keeping them uncrowded saves lives. But if you're in a community where there was really not much of an effective health system, really, what's the point? I'm saying this because there's a trade-off, and although India's health expenditure is small at 3.5%, it's variable. And in some places, the health system is really unavailable and unattainable. And this whole point of trying to prevent coronavirus spread to unburden a health center is ironic, because there really wasn't an effective health facility anyway. So yes, India needs to spend more on healthcare, but it calls into question the wisdom of keeping us at home to save lives from an unburdened health center. If there wasn't a very good health center, if you're in a part of India that really wasn't saving a lot of lives from hospitals and primary health facilities, you have to call into question what we're accomplishing with our local quarantine and our local lockdown. So I'm worried that parts of India have inflicted an unnecessary damage to their economy from following a lockdown strategy that really wasn't going to save anybody. We're gonna, 60 to 70% of us are going to acquire the virus before this is done in the next 2 years. The vaccine it may never come, and if it does come, it will be scarce and widely unavailable. All right, so the benefit of coronavirus is to some extent there will be some people whose lives will be saved from going to an effective hospital. But those who are most affected by the economy are the poor. And I'm thankful to Mr. Thakar for pointing that out. And India does have 17 to 20% of the population living in poverty. And we know that absolute poverty is killing people every day in the world and in India as well. And now that we're plunging more people into poverty, that is a health harm that needs to be weighed against the health benefit of our lockdowns and quarantines. India has done a remarkable job moving people out of poverty, and it has reduced the poverty rate, cut it by half since the 2004. So we've achieved a lot in poverty reduction, and most of the poverty reduction that India achieved, that pathway to poverty reduction has happened in small businesses mostly. Most of the people who got out of poverty in the last 20 years got out from employment in a small business. And the economic burden of this is falling most heavily on the small businesses around the world and in India as well. And the recovery that we need to engineer for India needs to be a recovery of the small businesses, not just for its impact on poverty, but to create demand. Those small businesses and the poor who are employed in those small businesses are the engine of the demand, and domestic demand will be critical to any recovery. So here's the question that we need to raise in our recovery policy. Yes, we need credit, but credit in the hands of local bankers is not reaching the small businesses. This is the problem in the USA, where we have relief packages and relief credit, but people are people, and bankers are conservative, and they're not giving that credit to the small businesses. So for public health reasons, as well as for economic reasons, fighting against the local politics that puts the credit to the friends and cronies of the local banker, this has to be an important public health strategy as well as an economic strategy. Focusing on the small businesses, their credit and their employees is critical. And focusing on the health needs of the poor, we have, I'm so excited every time I read the Ayushman Bharat foundational documents. I see what's happening in PMJ. I see the potential of the health and wellness centers provided for in Ayushman Bharat. I think we've got a moment to seize that opportunity. The legislation is in our hands. It's the execution. Right now is the time to put our actions behind the health and wellness centers and the outreach of the PMJ universal health coverage plans. So I'll pass it over to the other panelists.
Very quickly, can we just have Hema in? Hema, please, over to you for MSMEs. I'm not giving any like background to it. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Are you hearing me? Am I audible? Hello?
You're audible.
Thank you. See, I know we have been talking about the global and the larger issues. Now I would like to represent it from the angle of the MSME and see what can be done at the ground level to improve these to add to this, to find a solution to these problems that we have very elaborately described all along now. The first and foremost is to understand that most of the MSMEs, characteristically, they have a small customer base and they are very highly dependent on few customers. So and their dependence is so high that if the customer catches a cold, they'll get pneumonia. This is their relationship. So given this kind of relationship, we have to see how the customer can think of the vendor more holistically, more inclusively, and see that he is fair. Because the main problem of this labor that we are discussing is, number one, the facilities available to them, and number two, the way they are treated. It is so unfair. Any amount of legislation is not going to help. It is the industry which will have to step in and which will have to include them, and it will have to provide, like they would provide for their own. If they had a member of their family in the business, how would they provide for them? That's exactly how they need to do it. I think this kind of inclusive behavior will start amongst the larger businesses, and there will be a fair remuneration and more inclusiveness in this business rather than cutthroat competitions. We are going to be seeing more and more collaborative way of working, because by themselves the MSMEs will get easily wiped out with the kind of debt burden that they have and all the rest of the problems that they have. So the hope is that there will be fair play, and there will be we will start looking at fair returns to all the people in the entire value chain. Not only if you take, for instance, a garment unit, the people, the actual tailors and the workers, they are paid such pittance that they have absolutely no financial muscle to withstand this kind of loss of salary for more than 1, 2, 3 months. And what kind of muscle is that? That is completely untenable. So to include that, if you look at the, we've already talked about the skewness in our wealth distribution. The only way is to have a fair price paid, and for the labor that has been to it, whether it be the service sector, the manufacturing sector we are talking about. The second aspect is about the lack of financial muscle to withstand and sustain such market conditions for long. The third is very high dependence on banks and private borrowings. MSMEs are invariably worried about the next installment to be paid, the interest to be paid, collections getting adjusted against interest and installment overdues. And so how do I pay the salary? This is their constant worry. So the immediate impact of this slowdown is, number one, the losses that the MSMEs are incurring, which is completely eroding the already fragile financial situation that they are in. Second is the mounting payables in the bank, overdraft becoming irregular. Third is getting some working capital for executing the orders on hand to revive their business. So my point is, in a larger angle, we will have to talk about how can we have more inclusive and how can we have more responsible business, which will take care of all the participants in that entire value chain. That has to be taken care of. Without that, it's not going to be possible. So the major organizations should take care to see that payments are made on time, on whom the MSMEs are dependent. They should make sure that they finance their working capital rather than ask the banks to independently finance it. Number one, these large organizations have got access to financing sources like banks and investors, and these people don't have that kind of access. Number one. The second thing is, and this will in fact have a cascading effect, because if the larger organizations include the MSMEs in their purview, so will the MSMEs include their employees and their vendors in their purview, and that's how the entire system can be much healthier and better for everybody. So take, for instance, if we have a construction site, yes, it does cost money to put up the labor in a decent place, give them sufficient facilities. But we cut short all that, pay them pittance, let them stay in squalor, and then we have a beautiful building coming up. What kind of justice is that? What I'm saying is, yes, cost will go up, but then the market will also pay for it, because this is the equitable way of doing things. One. Second thing is, we must, make sure in the short run, the MSMEs have to focus on having cash. Cash is much more important today than the profits, at least in the near future. Focus on collections, ensure that sales are with quick collection periods, even if margins are lower. Don't prepay loans to avail the reduced interest rates. You were mentioning that the banks are worried that they'll use this money for something else. Yes, these problems are there.